Ganz herzlich willkommen zurück hier auf der Hauptbühne beim DGNB Jahreskongress 2022. So langsam biegen wir auf die Zielgerade ein. Gehört in einem anderen Themenraum, ging es gerade relativ heiß her, was die Diskussionen angeht. Hier auf der Bühne gibt es jetzt gleich den nächsten Impuls. Ich möchte an der Stelle mich aber auch schon mal bedanken, auch beim ganzen großen, breiten Team, was uns hier unterstützt hat, sowohl der technische Support, den wir hier haben, auch im Background, unseren Dienstleister, der die Plattform ins Laufen gebracht hat und heute unterstützt. Natürlich das breite Team aus der DGNB, die hier alle wild, Sie sehen das ja nicht, Sie sehen nachher immer nur die hier vorne dran sind. Aber das ist ein großes Team, das das alles möglich gemacht hat in der Planung und in der Umsetzung. Also auch an der Stelle schon mal, bevor es nachher untergeht, beim Abmoderieren nach dem letzten Vortrag, ein ganz, ganz herzliches Dankeschön auch von meiner Seite hier schon mal. An der Stelle jetzt wechseln wir auch die Sprache für die letzten beiden Impulse, die wir haben. So we switch to English because we have two international speakers at the end of our Congress here. And for the first one, I'd like to introduce you Lars Ostenfeld Riemann, coming from Denmark, from Ramboll. Ramboll, for everyone who doesn't know it, is a global engineering, architecture and consultancy company. At least founded in Denmark in 1945. You have more than 16,000 experts worldwide, so quite a big company. In Germany, you have 12 offices with about 800 employees, so everyone who haven't heard about them yet, you should have known. Lars is almost, for all his time, he has been working for Ramboll. He started engineering at the Technical University of Denmark in the 90s, and since 1995 you're at Ramboll in very different positions. Currently you're executive director for the buildings business unit, and you have project experiences in more than 30 countries, so you really have a global view on what's been happening in the last decades and what's going on now. So really looking forward to your insights, and especially to the view where are we going to. And your Impulse had a very interesting approach. You will talk about regenerative design beyond sustainability. So we're always talking about sustainable building, and you'll introduce why we even need to think beyond. So the stage is yours, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's truly a good opportunity to bring out a message which I think is very important. And as you said, I've been 26, 27 years in this business. When I first started as a young engineer, I was introduced to a very new concept. This was in 1995. It was called the environmental friendly design, and there were, the very early thoughts about sustainable design. But it has taken much longer than anybody anticipated, and at least I anticipated, to move the agenda to where we are today. And I can also see that we need to move the agenda much further in order to, preserve our planet. So the message that I'm gonna give you today is let's move more steps and take this agenda further. So I'll talk a little bit, just 1 minute, about Ramboll, but also what is the problem we are trying to solve. When I talk about regenerative design, what is it that we mean with this? And then show a couple of examples that are not really regenerative, but it's at least attempts to be regenerative. And then also talk about land use, density, and system boundaries. So Ramboll, as we heard before, is a global engineering company founded in 1945 in Copenhagen, Denmark. We have expanded to many other countries today, and we are about 16,000 experts. So that's enough, I think. Yeah, here's a map that shows where we are. We are basically in the Western world. Most of it, our business is in Europe and the US, but also some activities in Asia, which is a very fast-growing market. We do our business within the buildings sector, Also environment and health is a market for us, transportation, energy, water, and management consulting. So we are a multidisciplinary company that looks at holistically at the challenges of the society. And our mission is to create sustainable societies. This was already defined in 1945 with a couple of different words, but the essence and the meaning of the founders, the vision of the founders was to create sustainable societies. And we just last week introduced our next strategy for the company, our next 4-year strategy, which is called Partner for Sustainable Solutions. And that's because we really go all in on sustainability. We want to help the world move in a better direction. So what is the problem we are trying to solve? Well, if you look at the building sector and how much building stock we've built so far throughout history of the civilization, we are now about 235 billion square meters of buildings. And we are 7.8 billion people. But if you look 40 years ahead, we're going to be 10.2 billion people. In 30 years, it's going to be 9.7 billion. So there's going to be many more of us. And at the same time, we are getting more wealthy. We can afford more. And we bring people out of poverty, and those people also want to live in better buildings in the future. So we are anticipating a doubling in 40 years of the current building stock. So instead of 235 billion, we are anticipating 465 billion square meters of buildings. So you can imagine if we already by now have ruined the planet and we're going to build the same in 40 years, we cannot continue building in the same way. We must build in a different way. The concept of planetary boundaries was developed between 12 years ago by the Stockholm Resiliency Institute. And it looks at what is the capacity of the Earth to support human activity. And when they kind of looked at where are we today, they saw that already today we have actually exceeded a number of planetary boundaries. So that is, first of all, within biodiversity. There's so much loss of biodiversity every year that it is dangerous for the planet. We don't have many years back if we don't do something. It's also climate change, but a little less serious, surprisingly, because that tends to be all we talk about. And then it's about land system change, and finally about biogeochemical flows, where I think at least the last one is not so relevant for the building sector, but the three most critical or other critical ones are very relevant for the building sector. So we really have to look at those planetary boundaries and get them back to the within the limits, within the green zone. Otherwise, we are going in the wrong direction. You can also say this in a different way. You can say that unless we do something, then already in 2050. We will use the biocapacity of 3 Earths, and so you can imagine how fast it will go before we have used up all resources. And when people try to understand what do we mean by this, well, what we mean is if you have money in the bank, you spend all the money, then you start borrowing money, but you cannot continue borrowing money. At some point, you have to pay that money back. Otherwise, you go bankrupt. So humankind, you could say, is about to go bankrupt for the capacity, or the biocapacity of what we have borrowed from Earth. We have to pay it back. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. How can we do that? I want to start with one quote that I think is quite interesting. In many ways, the environmental crisis is a design crisis. It's a consequence of how things are made, buildings are constructed, and landscapes are used. This is a quote from 2007, so it's already 15 years ago, from a book by Van der Rijn, and yeah, that's it. And one model, kind of conceptual model that I'd like to use to explain this is this model that is inspired by Bill Reed. He's an American sustainability pioneer. So it shows that sustainability is not either, either it's sustainable or it's not. This shows a scale, from conventional on the left side to regenerative on the right side. And in the middle we have sustainable. Sustainable means, per definition, we are doing zero impact, and we can continue doing that, what is sustainable, forever. But that's not where we are today, and it's not really where most ambitions are going. Most ambitions are going, less. They're less than sustainable. So you could say, on one hand, the mindset, this is to the left, is how can we do less harm? How can we reduce carbon emissions? How can we reduce biodiversity harm? How can we conserve energy? So that's the mindset we have today in the building sector. So the mindset of doing less harm. If we want to do things that are good and bring back those impacts on the planetary boundaries, we have to do more good. So we have to move beyond sustainability. We have to move to restorative design and regenerative design. So if I put an arrow here, where are we today? It's going to be, not very sustainable. Most building codes are at the far left end of this scale. We have certification schemes like DGNB. They are trying to move the standards and to the right. So DGNB Silver is doing some less harm than conventional buildings. DGNB Gold is doing even less, and Platinum doing, you could imagine, almost sustainable. But they're still in that end of the scale where we are trying to do less harm, and we are not really reaching sustainability, true sustainability. And at least we are not crossing the line to do more good. So this is where we have a net positive impact, where we produce more energy or capture more carbon, produce more water than what we use. Or it can go all the way to what we call regenerative design, which I'll come back to in a minute what that is. And the final thing I want to point out here is that there should be a border, where we say if you go to the left of this border, it should be illegal. You cannot allow projects to be built that are doing this much harm on the environment. So if you are in that area, you don't get a building permit. That should be a requirement, and that border should move towards the center in the next decade. So regenerative, what do we mean? Well, there is a lot of discussions about that. First of all, it's not a new thing. It's probably about 30 years since the first pioneers started talking about regenerative design. But it is a holistic, process-oriented approach of urban planning and design, where the city is designed as a living system in partnership with nature. It requires a mind shift to an ecological worldview while combining strategies from regenerative design, which is about eco-literacy, focus on positive health and well-being, place-based thinking, co-evolution, and whole systems approach, and approaches from the urban ecological design while studying local urban ecosystems and metabolism. So that was a lot of words. But basically it aims for partnerships with nature and So we have to, I think here the message is we have to shift our mindset and we have to look at nature as a partner. And so there are a number of new things we have to learn about co-evolution, about whole thinking, whole systems approach. So you could also show that in a kind of different way. We are on a curve, the sustainability curve. We have a lot of things that we are doing and trying to achieve. And then we are at the end of the curve, and we cannot get longer because we are limited by the mindset we have put in place when we design our buildings. What we need is really to take those 6 topics that I showed on the former slide and relearn that. In the Western world specifically, we haven't learned that from school. We have learned a different mindset. But if you go to some of the other parts of the world, indigenous people, for example, they have a truly regenerative mindset. So there's another curve where we have to apply our new mindset, and then we have to go and use renewable energy and think in all these new ways to reach what we want to reach. So there is what I call here, I've put that in the bottom of the slide, old sustainability thinking and new sustainability thinking. We have to move to the new sustainability thinking. And we have to do that within the next decade. So what I think, where we are today is best practice is DGNB Platinum. By the way, where I come from in Denmark, we also use DGNB, a Danish version of that. We have to move to a net zero mindset quite quickly in the next couple of years, and then a net positive mindset, and then a regenerative mindset by the end of the decades. If we can do that, then we can start paying back our debt to nature, and we can start creating hope that we can also survive in the future. And I want to show you just a few attempts, but again, these are designs from the present, so they are not the future mindsets necessarily. Some of the features here are about regenerative design, but basically, if you look at, if you have a site, and you're designing a building, what you have to think of is how can I give back to the site more than there was there in the beginning. And in this case, this is an office building in the center of Copenhagen. It's a brownfield site, so there was something there before. It used to be an industrial site. And so first of all, it's, in this case, quite easy to give back more because there was nothing there. There wasn't even any green space or any biodiversity, any nature. So of course, it's going to be part of it to put back some elements of nature. In this case, the building is also trying to reach zero energy, zero carbon emissions. It's a timber building. There is a noisy road on one hand, so it's thought of as a noise barrier between the road and the residential area on the other side. It will use the seawater because it's on the harbor front. It will use the seawater for cooling the building or for as a heat sink for the heat pumps. It will create social space. So regenerative design is not only about nature; it's also about the social elements of giving back to the site. There will be roof terraces, and there will be a lot of daylight, and so everything that we know already from DGNB Platinum will be part of it. And then the question is, how far can this project go beyond that? So, big question: is this regenerative? No, it is. It is probably not. But again, we don't have a definition of regenerative design. We don't have a certification scheme to tick boxes and give points. So we don't really know when is a building truly regenerative. But the mindset of designing this building is very traditional in the old sustainability mindset. And then you can ask, well, does it have to be the site where you give back more than you take, or can you define a neighborhood, a bigger area? Because a lot of things, you cannot make work on a site level, on a buildings level. You have to do it on a neighborhood level. So here's another project also from Copenhagen. It's actually an old waste dump that was covered with soil, so a landfill, and that was 30 years ago. And since then, it has just been lying there. There has been growing some trees and bushes and grass on top of that since. And nature has started invading this area. And so what do you do? Well, we need houses, of course, like everywhere. And so we came up with this idea of a very green, again, timber buildings, very human scale. Here's some pictures. A lot of greenery, very connected to nature, no cars, all transported public transportation. And all of the traditional sustainability criteria is fulfilled. But as you can see here, there's much more nature here than there was on the previous project, because there is space. And so you can have small lakes. You can imagine, how insects, microorganisms, and even bigger animals can live here next to humans in the center of the city. Not exactly the center, but very close to the center. Is it regenerative? Good question. And then finally, this is a project that everybody shows today, or yesterday and today, the Pasco Verticale in Milan. It's definitely green, and it definitely gives back more green space to the sites than there was there in the beginning. It has a lot of qualities, but there's also a downside. So there is a lot of structural concrete or embodied carbon in this building because it carries so much weight. And of course, there's also the cost element. Is it feasible, or is it, how much does it cost to maintain it with all these trees? So again, you can ask, is this regenerative or is it not? I don't want to answer that question, but I think if you are really interested in doing regenerative design, there is a very good tool that was also developed in Denmark, partly by some of my colleagues at the architecture school in Copenhagen. It's the material hierarchy or material pyramid, and it shows, at the top are the most carbon-intensive materials that you should use less of. At the bottom, it's all the bio-based materials that would have a bio or a carbon capture component to them, and they can be so it's like a renewable project. They can be produced over and over again, and so those materials should be the ones that you use the most of, and so everything in between. If there is an alternative, you should always go as low as possible in this hierarchy. That would be a very good guideline for achieving maximum regenerative thinking, and also less embodied carbon. One more point I want to make before I finish is about the system boundaries. And again, we see cities can be very different. Some can be very dense with high-rise buildings. Others can be very flat, a lot of urban sprawl. And so at what scale, or at, where do you set the boundaries if you want to do a regenerative project? And a recent study by the CTBUH, Council for Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, showed 9 different ways to build a residential unit, 2,000 residential units for, you can either go in the very low right-hand corner, you can go single-family houses in a big urban area, 1 square kilometer for 2,000 units typically. And then you can go all the way up and build 2,000 units in one high-rise building, which would be 215 stories high. And so in terms of land, how much land do you take up? The high-rise is preferred. But if you want to do a regenerative building, I think the single-family home is probably the easiest one to do in a regenerative way. But then you can see you will also take up a lot of land. Land is a carbon capture sink or carbon capture machine. So if you take up land, you prevent yourself for capturing carbon. You prevent yourself for planting a forest. And so that has also a negative impact. And the other thing that you don't calculate, if you just compare high-rise to single-family homes, you'll probably find there's more embodied carbon in the high-rise building. But then you forgot to take into account all the roads connecting the houses, all the infrastructure, the utilities, piping, and you forgot to take into account all the transportation that it requires in the daily life of these people. So it's not just about high-rise versus low-rise. It's about the whole system thinking. So that's where regenerative thinking comes into mind. And so what is, if from an embodied carbon perspective, what is most optimal? Well, if you say the single-family homes are 100% embodied carbon, the denser you build, you can see the less embodied carbon you generate until a certain point. Then once you build really, really tall, like the 200-story tall building, then you start getting more embodied carbon. But you can actually build also 120-story tall buildings and use less embodied carbon than for the single-family homes. The optimal, in this case, is probably about 5, 6, it says 4 here, but 5, 6 stories. So it's very typical for European cities like Berlin, Munich, Copenhagen. That is actually a very good city model, so no need to change there. And the other question that comes up is, of course, then what is the KPI, the key performance indicator? What is it we measure? Is it CO2 per square meter, or is it CO2 per person? Because if you have single-family homes, you might have more space per person than if you have tall buildings. So it's actually, it's the personal footprint that you would be interested in. And is it the neighborhood, or is the buildings you measure? So those questions we would have to answer. So where do we go from here? Well, I think I want to make a call to action. First of all, we have to think in the whole system. So that's the illustration I have there on that slide. We need to change the mindset, going from silo thinking to system thinking. Number 2 is we need building codes to change. So building codes today, they are not supporting sustainability in any country, I think. Most building codes are focused on operational energy, and that's all they carry about. Most building codes don't even have embodied carbon. That will be coming, but again, it's a very limited focus on energy and carbon, and not all the other things. And then, of course, now I'm here at DGNB in Germany, and I really think that you can be front runners in changing the mindset. But so what is we need? We need DGNB for zero impact, or we need DGNB for regenerative design. We need a way to guide people. What is a regenerative building? What is a net zero impact building? What are the things you can balance out, so that one thing might be taking more from site, but then the other thing might be giving back, so that at the end it's a net positive building. Those things we need. So that's my message here today.
Thank you very much. Lars, so at least I wrote down the main question that I would have for the bigger round before we go to the backstage room would have been what would you expect from DGNB, at least on the last slide you already showed it. What I find very important also to bring in mind, also to comment on the slides where you have DGNB silver, gold, and platinum, and then the next steps is that, of course, and you know that there's not this DGNB Platinum that's here today that will be the DGNB Platinum in the future. So that we have this further development. We're at the moment working on the next step for the basic certification. Also look into the future for a system under the working title DGNB system 2030, where we will focus a lot more. So what you brought here is exactly what we're working on.
That's great.
And also, I guess, Philip had also the point that we should talk about the narratives and where we aim for. And especially on this net zero aspect, we already had this working on defining what is a net zero building in use and also in constructions already. And of course, as you become member at the DGNB a few months before, you're always invited to really push this forward. I guess what's very, very important is that when looking at that, and I guess you told it right with the building codes at the very end, the certification, as it's free to use, it can start shifting mindsets, but of course the building codes need to brought to the next steps, and we do not want to only be a certification system for lighthouses. How do you deal with this at Ramboll? Of course, you will also have your big lighthouse projects where it might be easier, where there's not a limit on budget and so on. But how do you deal in smaller projects with this ambition that you mentioned there?
So I think the big barrier is not unwillingness from our clients, or it could be budget constraints, but it's not, in many cases, the decisive factor. I think the decisive factor is many clients don't know what it means. They don't have the insights or the experience or the knowledge to go fully sustainable, and for all they know is it's an additional cost. So they are always very nervous. How sustainable can I be within the budget? And what we are trying to do is to educate our clients, and we're trying to show them alternatives. Some alternatives will save you money. And we just had a discussion about embodied carbon. You can actually save a lot of carbon in a project and at the same time save money, because you can work more with the design to optimize the design, but you can also challenge the brief. Do you really need this basement, or can we start from ground level up because the basement is so carbon intensive? And all of these questions we ask, and then clients are educated and they start to understand, and then we make decisions in the project to go in the right direction.
I guess, and this is somehow also, that's a short summary also for what we had here in the 2 days, is that this education is only possible if you or if anyone who's part of this building sector needs to really start educating, and you need the competences. And I guess this is something like you said, that people may have some fear where to go to, and or yesterday, like Eike said, he just told experiences. He have done it once, and he can tell for the second time, and the people hear what he's talking to. So therefore, I'm really looking forward for you sharing your experience in the DGNB network in the years to come. We will move over to the backstage room in a few minutes for everyone else. Ich wechsle nochmal ins Deutsche. Jeder, der alternativ Lust hat, nochmal das Matchmaking einmal auszuprobieren, bevor der Kongress zu Ende ist, wäre jetzt nochmal die Gelegenheit dazu. Ansonsten gibt es in gut 20 Minuten auch unseren letzten Themenraum. Da geht es auch um ein Thema, was Lars auch angesprochen hatte, nämlich das Thema Materialwahl. Die Hierarchie hattest du angesprochen. Ich bin gespannt, wie da die Diskussion an der Schnittstelle zwischen Architekten und Hersteller auch läuft. Und hier wird es dann um 16:30 Uhr noch beim abschließenden Impuls noch einen Blick geben, auch in einem Bereich, den du angesprochen hattest, dieses Learning from Experiences, das wir hier vielleicht hier oder in anderen Ländern nicht so haben, aber mit Anupama Kundu indischer Architektin, die genau in einem Land auch dort arbeitet oder in anderen Ländern arbeitet, wo es solche Kulturen gibt, von denen wir hier lernen können. Also insofern ist, glaube ich, auch der letzte Impuls noch ein ganz spannender. Also in Ihnen, die Lust haben mitzukommen in den Backstage-Bereich, kommen Sie gerne mit. Ansonsten viel Spaß noch beim weiteren Programm.